So, a warm welcome to this session good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, wherever you're watching us around the world. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this session on local acceptance for wind and solar, which is part of this 19th World Wind Energy Conference, the first World Wind Energy Conference, which was held in virtual format. This specific panel here is now the third session in this hall. The two previous ones were about community energy, where IRENA Coalition for Action launched a white paper on community energy, and the previous one was community energy in off-grid areas. And now we're talking about a topic which is, of course, related to that. It is about local acceptance, as I said, for wind and solar. Let me explain a little bit that, of course, there is a background that we as an association have been working on this topic. Actually, since the very first beginning, we started almost 20 years ago discussing and setting up guidelines, sustainability due diligence guidelines, which also included how to engage communities and citizens. And the reason why we've also been working a lot on community ownership is that we understand that there is a need to strengthen the local support for wind farms, but we also hear for solar farms around the world. We've had just very recently a webinar, a separate webinar, which was held on the occasion of the COP in collaboration with Falck Renewables. I'm pleased to have one guest here about this topic, about how to engage communities to come to a just energy transition. This is very important, and we want to start a process in order to see whether we can develop international recommendations for development of wind farms and potentially also other technologies in order to find good ways sharing benefits with locals and, of course, have a good high degree of acceptance. Yeah, with this, I'm very pleased that we have 4 panelists here, people with different background. First, my great pleasure to welcome Jan Philipp, who is, I take from your German title, I think, Managing Director for Project Development at WPD in Germany. WPD is one of the major German developers, as I would say, still compared with some of the international companies, not a very big one, but active in many countries around the world. And I'm sure you will tell us more about how many and which countries you are active. You have a long tradition, a long experience, also working with people, citizens, in particular in Germany. And I have the pleasure now to hand over the floor to you, and please tell us about how WPD is dealing with social interaction, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me first share my screen. I was asked to keep it brief. So first of all, can you see my screen now?
Not yet, but you have all around 15 minutes.
Can you see my screen now?
No?
Not yet. I was sharing it. Let's see. So nothing is moving yet. I pushed the share button actually, but why is it not working yet?
Oh,
here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Yes, good.
Now you can see everything?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. So hello to the world in these crazy times from my side. I'm Jan Philipp, working for WPD onshore in Germany, basically or mainly in one of the states, in the eastern states, in so-called Brandenburg. It's more or less surrounds Berlin. Yeah, I'm working for WPD since 10 years, and since 10 years I am also struggling with the local acceptance for wind energy. Let me give you a brief introduction to who we are as WPD. We are, I would say, one of the largest non-utility wind park developers in Germany, with a staff of 3,200 people across the whole value chain of wind park development, from developing till the erection and till the management of wind parks. We are also active in the offshore business since a couple of years. I think we are one of the only non-utilities who are, got into that adventure. And yeah, we are active in 28 countries across the whole world, more or less, from Germany, where we are based in Bremen, in northern Germany, across the whole globe, more or less. And so we are facing the challenge of local acceptance in more than 28 countries, and being active in 28 countries means we are faced with the challenge of local acceptance times 28 times X in all the different projects we are working on. The setting in each market we are active is quite different. I picked the German market since that's the market I'm most familiar with, and try to show you a little bit what we are doing in Germany. The settings in Germany are quite special, I would say, and maybe not really comparable to other markets, sometimes more, sometimes less. In Germany, we are having a very densely populated country. We are ranking 63 compared to all other countries in the world. We have a pretty relatively low inequality. We have an established feed-in system for renewables, but from my side, a very excessive bureaucracy, especially regard getting a permission for wind energy turbines. But I don't want to get into that too deeply. What we are facing developing our wind parks is that we have a widely distributed land ownership, mainly among locals. It's getting a little more concentrated in the last few years, but mainly we are dealing with local landowners. So every landowner is directly affected from the wind project we are setting up. We are also facing powerful lobby organizations, especially out of the environmental scene, that sometimes have more, sometimes have less understanding of that more wind parks are just necessary in order to keep our climate in order. We are having also many very well and increasingly well organized civic initiatives against wind energy turbines all across Germany, organizing themselves into, I would say like overhead groups, copying actions from each other and copying successful initiatives from each other. So we are dealing with them pretty much all over Germany in more or less professional ways. We are trying to tackle the problems of local acceptance with different approaches. I would like to differentiate between like a technical approaches. I will get to that in a little more details very shortly. Financial approaches and approaches that I call hands-on. We are also dealing with a challenge on different levels, on the federal level, on the statal level, and on the level of local municipalities, and also directly with local citizens. I will give you like a brief overview of what we're doing on the technical side. For example, we were active with our sister company, Deutsche Windtechnik. We developed a system reducing the light pollution, which will be mandatory starting from 2023 in Germany. We developed a system that is transponder based. So I think most of you will be well aware of what this is all about. More or less, it reduces the blinking lights of wind energy turbines to the moment when there's actually a flying object around. And so most of the time, the night will be dark again, starting from 2023 all over Germany, and we have developed an own system for that. Another major problem, of course, is bird strike. You have all heard about that. Together with another company from the US, we developed a system called Identiflight. It's a camera-based system to detect birds. It's based on an intelligent system that has to be learned based on artificial intelligence. It's a camera-based system, not a radar system. And whenever there's a bird coming close to the wind parks, the system can more or less switch off the turbines when the bird comes too close. So that's another technical approach. Of course, we also try to install turbines that have reduced noise all over Germany whenever that is possible and feasible. For example, serrations at the wingtips and stuff like that. Financial approaches. We strongly supported actually, the introduction of paragraph 6 into the renewable energy law in Germany. I don't know if you have heard of that all over Germany. It was a major problem for us that we cannot really share at least part of the problems with the local municipalities. It was pretty much just illegal for us. And the introduction of this new paragraph into the federal renewable energy law now allows us to give at least 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour per year to municipalities without of acting illegal. This amounts to like around 30,000 euro per wind turbine per year. And actually that has, from my experience, it's a pretty new thing to us. But the mayors we are dealing with, I think some of them really turned 180 degrees now, knowing about the possibility to earn this kind of money each year. And I'm very positive about that this will also bring us some turnarounds in the future to come as well on the municipality side. Another thing we do is that we offer discount electricity, for example, to local citizens, because of course everybody is asking that is not directly involved into the wind farm. What's in for me, and that's at least something we can give back to local citizens that are not landowners themselves, so we can't really pay them a land lease, but that's one thing at least we can do in local communities. What we are also offering is a broad variety of green investments for local citizens. That ranges from like a few €100 up to the investment into a whole turbine. Of course, that's in Eastern Germany, that's quite complicated sometimes, but especially in Western Germany and Northern Germany, that's quite common for local citizens to invest in whole turbines. And that's what we're also offering if the conditions are right for that. What we are generally trying as well is that we have a fair distribution of the land lease among the landowners. So we're trying to, not everybody is picking on each other who gets more and who gets less. That's one thing we are trying. So we divide the land lease we are paying, mainly based on the land that's made available for everybody. Now, a few hands-on approaches we are doing, especially after the implementation of a wind park. We try to compensate for the project we are doing by really doing something locally, meaning something like a natural compensation that is adapted to the community, that is mostly developed together with the municipalities. It can be like trees, hedges, small lakes that are renaturated and stuff like that. What we're also doing, if the community wants to do it, is the financing and developing of zoning schemes and zoning plans. So if the community really wants to have a fixed design of a wind park, for example, a special height, special places for the turbines, we work together with the communities in order to develop such a zoning plan in order to fix it for the future, and that that the turbines have a certain setup, so that is guaranteed for the future. We also have projects in education, so to increase the acceptance for renewable energies at a very early stage in many states of Germany, because we try to influence the younger in order for them to talk to their grandparents, to their parents about renewable energies and increase the acceptance like that. We also try to increase the social interaction of or surrounding our projects in general by several approaches. Actually, we are actually now thinking about, for example, financing local bars, for example, to have places where the local community can get together, because the areas we are active in, that's one of the things that's really lacking at many times. But we are only beginning to start thinking about that. So give us some time to develop that idea a little further. So we can now come to my conclusion. I think every wind park project has a problem with local acceptance in one variety or the other. I think it's important to become aware of the specific nature of the problem at an early stage in order to find the special approach, the approach needed for that special project, because there's no one-size-fits-all approach to tackle the problem of local acceptance. But I think even with the best approach, you will never achieve complete acceptance among all people in the local community. So it's especially if the social attention already exists, there's still some patience to be needed in order to work on that. Yeah, so much from my side.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this looks like a very comprehensive approach that you have, and of course, I think nobody expects that there's no conflict anymore at the end of the day, because certainly that would only happen in paradise, and we're not yet at that stage, unfortunately.
Yet. Maybe with a new government, we'll get a little bit closer.
Yes, indeed. I come back later to you, also asking you about how you see the different markets, because it's a big number of markets you told us you are active in, and you now referred to mainly your approaches and concrete activities you do in Germany. But let's first listen to our next speaker, and it's my pleasure to welcome Fabrizio Tortora, who is the head of business development of Falck Renewables. Falck Renewables is a developer as well, headquartered in Italy and also active in a number of markets around the world, not only in Europe. Fabrizio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and hello everybody. I would like to welcome you on this online event on the 19th World Energy Conference. Just a brief correction. FARC is a developer, but is an IPP, which own and operate 1.4 gigawatts of capacity, but is also a big, no, it's fine, but is quite a converting since 5 years in a very big developer. Despite in the past we got some development activities. And,
I think you're similar in this context. I'm sorry for
No, but it's completely fine. And I like that, given that I'm in charge of business development, I like to see us as a developer. So it's fine and more than happy to take it. So coming back to the presentation, FARC Renewables again is an IPP and is developing since 2000 and beginning of the nature of the FARC is 2000. But then we restarted the active development since 2016 and 17 with a new era that came on board. Coming to the topic, despite the Glasgow outcome as be so satisfactory to everybody, is it paving a great increase of renewable energy sources worldwide? In all the heated debates about ambitious climate goals, the transition, we really missed the discussion of how local communities could be involved. Because of the time seems to be very clear to us, without the involvement of the support of the people, no one of the goals communicated with any much concern can be achieved. So it seems to us that it's not a question of whether we involve the people, but how we involve the people. This is the main topic that I would like to touch today. And I will give you examples and real examples of what we are doing since the last 15 years on this regard. Let me start by showing you a film which has helped create it was taken at one wind farm in Scotland and has been awarded in the last and has been premiered last few weeks ago in Glasgow. I don't know if you hear the sound. No, okay, but let's say it's a dancing. So apart from the noise, it's useful to see the dance itself. In the interest of time, I just cut it, but you can find it on YouTube, as you can see from the video. And what did I show you this film? Is in our discussion at Corey Baker Dance, in this project, we quickly realized that we have a similar approach to sustainability. We need to reach not only the minds, but also the hearts of the people in order to have an impact, to make things happen. And this is the main goal that we have. In particular, local communities need to be involved. We are not only wanted to create a touching by making this video. We wanted to go behind, and that's what we agreed to include in our community engagement activities in UK. During the tours around Scotland of the present in the film, we would have offered dances workshop at schools close to the Scottish wind farms. Why we do this? At parks, we develop, construct, and operate renewable energy. This approach means that we will be present in the area, in this case on Shore Wind Farm in Scotland, for well over 40 years, from scouting to permitting to construction, the commissioning of the plants. 2 generations, at least, will be living without any repowering. 2 generations will be living with our plants in their region. It is our duty to convey with the local communities that we have a joint interest in the respective project, that we are reliable, credible partner on their side during the work period of when we will be earned trust and granted social license to operate. The social license being rooted in the beliefs, perception, and opinions held by the local population and other stakeholders about the project. Finally, it is dynamic and not permanent, this approach, because beliefs, opinions, and perceptions are subject to change, are subject to new information, and might be changing the perception of the plan. So this slide gives you a summary of what we are convinced that community engagement is strategic importance. Earn and maintain the social license to operate the community. Global pursuit of the sustainable development. Reduce the impacts on the communities and the environment, which is the real starting point, and reduce the development time of renewables, as Jan was just saying. Where we start, we develop a sustainability chapter focusing on community development. We promote the use of local labor force and short supply chain. We promote the economic participation of local communities in our plants, providing where possible, country by country, the opportunity to finance them. We support social education, environmental or infrastructure initiative in local communities brought forward by them through community benefit schemes, encourage the sharing of the best practices. Training and education, we support the creation of skills, competencies, and knowledge sharing in relation of the energy sustainability, including throughout the training. Environmental protection will minimize the impact of the environment on our activities in order to protect the ecosystem. Lease and enhance the customs and traditions locally. The key success factor in our belief and our experience is listening to the needs of the local, focusing on having a local impact, in particular with respect of local supply chain, establish and maintaining a transparent dialogue throughout the project life cycle, and be flexible about single elements of our approach as the needs of the communities differ from region to region and also time to time. In essence, it's not only about what we do, but how we do it, and the values that we live in. Community engagement approach, we have established a range of different ways of possibilities on how to cooperate and share value.
Excuse me, Fabrizio, your voice is going a bit up and down. I don't know whether there is anything with your microphone. You're moving, but it's sometimes a bit less. So yeah, just.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Fine?
Yeah. It's you don't disappear, but there's some like up and down. But if you maybe
Up and
try
down.
to.
And I would like to highlight one aspect I have not yet touched upon, the construction liaison group and the community manager, which is key for us and is quite innovative in our view, which is based on, from the initial stages, we try to establish a dialogue with local stakeholders, all stakeholders in general, not only the major or the consultancy. During construction, we established a permanent channel of communication with the local population throughout the activation of construction liaison group. That is means to keep the local community updated on project development and to offer prompt response to any issues raised by the community. Once construction is completed, the community manager is assigned to the facility alongside with the operational guys with the task of establishing and maintaining and keeping the relationship with the local inhabitants and maintaining the dialogue open. When it comes to shared value, we have several options of communities can choose among: community benefit scheme, cooperative scheme, co-ownership. One does not fit for all. It might be depending on from community to community, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Last but not least, a brief overview of what we have done in the last 15 years. And this is a very quick snapshot of what we did. And in particular, I would like to highlight that in the World Economic Forum has selected our local cooperative scheme as one of the most disruptive in the energy sector in the past decades. In fact, this cooperative scheme has been included in 2020 report, Global Innovation from the Energy Sector 2020, that collects the most innovative and effective practices accelerating the energy transition. Two small words on the last month's updates. In Sicily, we have launched the social lending initiatives, which is a disruptive new event in the Italian panorama, where inhabitants of Sicily, of Scicli, and Sicily in general, Scicli is the town where the plant is located, are offered to an opportunity to invest in their agrivoltaic plant at favorable interest rates. Linking back to the film that we saw at the beginning, we have the ambition to become leaders of a new regime, a regime in which the local communities have a say, are involved, can contribute, and are offered the opportunity to participate in the value generation. And on this, I would end my presentation, and thank you very much for the attention.
Yes, thank you very much also for very kind of practical insights on how you are approaching this. I like this video, of course, very much, and it reminds me of, some of you know that I worked for Hermann Scheer, one of the pioneers and also thinkers of the energy transition, and he always wrote about and talked about that we need a solar culture. I think this is something that is touching this aspect. Business culture as well. Now, it's been very good to hear from both of you, and let's now listen to science. I'm very pleased to have here Patrick Devine-Wright. Patrick, you are a professor for social science at Exeter University, and also you are a member, and this time I think I say it right, the IEA Task 28 on social acceptance of wind energy. You are one of the leading scientists when it comes to research on social acceptance and attitude towards wind turbines internationally. I've seen you quoted by scientists from different parts of the world. Now, after listening to our two kind of practitioners, I know you're also involved in community projects, but from your scientific angle, we look forward to hearing from you, maybe also referring a bit to what you've heard so far. Patrick.
Very much, Stefan, and thank you to the other speakers too. I'll just try and share my slides and see if we can take it from there. Okay. Can you see that, Stefan? It looks okay to me.
Yes, looks good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll crack on. And do let me know if I'm going on a bit too long. I'm sure you will anyway, but I may have too many slides. Just let me know.
This session is not too crowded, so I think we're well.
Okay, great. Okay, well, Stefan's made an introduction, so I won't spend too long on this, but basically I've been doing research on the kind of community and social acceptance side of renewable energy transitions for some time now. And that includes the kinds of technologies we're interested in here today: wind, onshore wind, etc., solar, but also a range of other technologies as well, including the grid infrastructure that's required in order to actually connect those projects up, and which also brings significant social acceptance challenges. And of late, I've been working across a number of scales and initiatives to try and ensure that my research doesn't end up in dusty libraries, but actually it informs, hopefully, some policy or practice in the real world as well. And as Stefan mentioned, I've been involved in my local energy cooperative for the last few years in that capacity too. So this slide really, I don't think I need to say too much for this audience, but I guess the final bullet point is really my starting point as a social scientist. We're not just talking about technological change here, we're talking about social change, and the two go hand in hand. It is misleading to view one rather than the other. They are related to each other, and that's, I guess, a key message and something that we are puzzling over as a group here today in terms of how best to bring societies and communities with us on this journey through this complicated and urgent energy transition. And of course, most of my research takes place in developed countries in a European context, but this is a global issue, and it's as much about access to energy for all as it is about clean energy and decarbonization of fossil fuel infrastructures, and we should bear that in mind. So what I'm going to do today is just pluck out two, I think, very important themes in the social science literature, and they are place and participation. And we've already heard some indication around opportunities to participate in wind and solar projects from the two first speakers. And of course, there are a variety of ways of participating, including financial. But I think the important point that I just want to make about the picture on the left is that I don't see a technology project, I see people. And I think that's very important in that message about the social and the technical going together. So this is a community energy initiative. It just happens to be about solar PV, a ground-mounted solar farm. But for me, it's an opportunity for people to participate, perhaps as share owners and neighbors, host communities in new energy projects. And I think there's a tendency for us to imagine technologies separate from people and have images that look as if people aren't involved. And I like this one because it actually has real people mixed up with the technology. The picture on the right, I'll come back to in a few minutes because it's a case study of a place where they are trying to reshape the local area away from fossil fuels and a coal-powered station into a net zero place. And so I think it nicely captures those two concepts of participation and place that I want to emphasize today. So again, in both of these cases, we're not just looking at technologies or technology potential, but we're looking at people, we're looking at communities, people's everyday lives, and the impacts that energy transitions will have on those. So participation is something that comes up again and again and again in the social science research literature, the social acceptance literature, and usually it's about its absence or its deficit. So procedural justice describes a sense that people would like the decision-making procedures, the consultations to be fair and open and transparent and equitable. And often when they are not perceived to be like that, that is central to community objections. And I totally acknowledge that there are issues around flickering and noise and those kinds of things, but there's also significant issues around transparency and decision-making and whether people feel that they actually have a say, whether these projects are top-down imposed on communities or they actually have some say in it. And the rise of the community energy idea starts from a very different place. It starts from a bottom-up approach to energy transitions and what happens if communities are actual instigators of energy projects rather than simply hosts. And the kind of theoretical models we have of community energy build in high levels of public and community participation into them. That's the part of the crucial definition of what makes a community energy project community. And cooperatives, which allow people to become actually part of the ownership structure of projects, is an important social innovation because it brings people in and can enable that identification. So it's not their project, but it's my project, it's our project. And that's very important in breaking down those walls between us and them that often happen between developers on the one side and communities on the other. And as we were discussing a few weeks ago in a similar webinar about this topic with Stefan, community cooperatives and energy projects, they're not just mechanisms for acceptance. They also have a way of strengthening communities and strengthening democratic structures. And that's a really important point to recognize globally. And I'll say more about those co-benefits of bringing communities into projects and along with them on the journey. And just to say that another concept that's been turning up quite a lot of late in academic research is called co-creation. And it can be transformative for energy transitions because it starts by bringing in stakeholders and bringing in communities at a very early stage and almost designing the project with them. But having said that, as with a lot of other academic concepts, there's a lot of ambiguity about exactly what it means. And of course, the recent pandemic has made it more challenging in some ways to do engagement, public and community engagement in some ways in a genuine and in-depth way. So we have to always be careful about the kind of the difference between the rhetoric and the reality around participation and engagement and what actually happens on the ground. And the politics of engagement is quite nicely articulated in this cartoon and this kind of well-known Arnstein's ladder of participation. Often there's a lot of skepticism amongst members of the public around what consultation really involves and is anybody really listening to what they see. And I think that issue of trust is extremely important in thinking about local acceptance and how do we build trust and how do we prevent the erosion of trust. Because there is a sense, whether we like it or not, that a lot of consultation is simply manipulation. And co-creation could offer a solution to that, but it might not, and it really depends, and it needs careful scrutiny and careful action. So that's the point about participation. Then I just want to say something briefly about this concept of place. And it really starts from a different position from the idea of, okay, let's think about wind energy, let's think about technologies. But if we think about the world as a world of places, of landscapes, of areas which people have a connection to, it puts the energy transition in a completely different light. And there's quite a lot of academic literature about people's senses of place and how the landscape around them and the cities and neighborhoods that they live in actually become part of their identity. They feel attached to those places and the people who live there. And that is important for really basic psychological functions of people to do with their self-esteem, the sense of meaning they have in their lives, sense of belonging with other people. And it can motivate people to participate, and that's important. Why do people choose to participate in collective action or in community neighborhood projects? Well, this sense of place is one of the ingredients that can enable that to happen. And it isn't just about making people kind of defend their little patch of turf against unwanted intruders from outside, the kind of NIMBY pejorative labeling. It can be a positive view of the locality and how it relates to broader goals and global challenges like climate change. So if we take more of a place-centered view of energy transitions, it leads to a different way of thinking about energy projects. They can be seen as acts of place-making or actually unmaking or remaking places. It definitely isn't necessarily a positive thing. But the point is to recognize that they aren't just material, physical things or economic things, but they affect people's experiences, they affect landscapes which people have emotional connections with, and affect people's everyday lives and how they act and what they do. And when we make energy projects happen, we employ what we call place frames, and these are ideas and narratives and stories about the future, usually positive, to imagine and to justify the reasons for change and why they suit particular places and localities in relation to elsewhere. But it raises lots of important questions about who has a say in this process, bringing these ideas of participation and place together. Who are the people who really count in placemaking? And are we making sure, are we doing enough to ensure that all voices are heard on this, not just the people who have the time and the energy and the cultural capital to engage, and that's an important question about openness. It also means we take a slightly different view of local people. I've already mentioned the NIMBY concept, which I think is a pretty unhelpful way of thinking about local people. But if we think about them as denizens, people who live in a place and feel connected to it, it has a number of consequences, important consequences for social acceptance in wind and solar. Number one, it opens up the idea that local people actually are the most knowledgeable people about that place, more knowledgeable than people who fly in there, like academics sometimes to do research, or developers who want to build a project. They're the local experts. They know how their places worked, often across generations. And that can be important in recognizing the value of that knowledge, because there are always contestations around expertise and who knows best and what information counts. It also draws attention to the sense of place and people-place relations that I've mentioned, which over many years in research has been shown to be important in explaining why people support and also why sometimes they object to energy proposals. And finally, it tells us something about participation, as I mentioned. Why do people want to get involved in community energy projects? And it's often not because of the energy bit, it's because of the community bit and the willingness to be part of something bigger, to be part of something that's fun and connects people up in a positive way. And those are things we can harness in energy transitions for the good of everybody. The point I want to make in this slide really is that it isn't just about wind and solar or even energy transitions. There's so much more at stake at the moment. It's important for us to recognize the kind of very difficult, uncertain and precarious societal context we're often working in at the moment. And many of us are aware of newspaper headlines showing public demonstrations, violence in the streets where people are very worried about restrictions on their liberty, rightly or wrongly. So we have increasing precarity in labour markets. We have displacement of individuals and their mobility around COVID. And we have an increasing sense of anxiety around what the climate emergency is going to bring, and the kind of deafening media exposure around COP26 a few weeks ago. Whilst it's positive on the one hand to engage people, it's also quite scary, particularly for younger people. And we need to take that into account as well. And there are structural inequalities that are incredibly important here. These anxieties and forces are not experienced equally across society. And it was important to hear earlier about the level of equality in Germany, for example. Countries differ in the gaps between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. And that's an important backdrop to how they respond to proposals for energy projects and whether they reinforce existing structural inequalities or actually do something to remedy them. And I think place and participation can maybe help with that a little bit, because it's not just about energy then, it's about things like belonging, identity, empowerment, which have broader social good in these difficult times. I've got a couple of very brief case studies to whittle through at this time. And they really ask the question, what if we aim to achieve energy transitions in a certain way, in a way that might enhance people's sense of place, and in a way that might leave communities more empowered through that process rather than less or the same as before. So the first project, very briefly, is that picture I showed you about the coal-fired power station and its attempt to create a net zero sense of place in a community in the West Midlands of England. And the important thing about this project is that it involved a whole variety of stakeholders in a partnership. And those stakeholders included different kinds of organizations, so a large energy company, an ENGIE, a French multinational, but also local councils, academics, a theatre group, community energy groups, a whole variety of different organizations coming together to try and do something really novel here under the banner of smart local energy systems. And the important thing is that a significant amount of the resource in this project was going towards user-centered engagement and design. So it's not a trivial element of the financial makeup of this project. It's actually a significant resource being put into engaging with communities. And you can see that in these quotes from some of the research we've been doing in interviews with stakeholders. People recognize that it isn't just about giving people education about a technology. Instead of pick a technology or stuff from a system and then try and move them towards that, which is the kind of acceptance narrative. Instead, start with the community, start with the place, start with their needs, and try and weave the idea of a net zero or a green energy project into that. And what's happened here is that they've realized that actually demolishing the coal-fired power station. Okay, it means probably less local pollution, but these are landmarks and it raises issues about identity and place. So what they're trying to do is to respond to that positively and work with the idea of heritage, past, present, and future, in molding a future for this place that is much more sustainable in terms of energy technologies and transitions. The second example is quite different, but it's more focused on wind energy, and it reflects the fact that in England, at least, which is one country, a more important part of the UK, there really hasn't been any onshore wind energy over the last 5 years. And the reason for that is because of political controversy around the siting of onshore wind in landscapes and the decisions of the government to try and make it effectively more difficult to get through the planning system. So what's been happening in my local area of Devon over the last year or two following the declaration of a climate emergency is an attempt to try and change that national picture at a local level. And what we did here was to enact something called a citizens' assembly, which is to bring a representative small group of local citizens together to take on some of the most politically sensitive bits of climate mitigation. In this case, that included onshore wind. And just to show you some of the findings very briefly, I've just highlighted some here because they connect this idea about public support, not NIMBYism, and the idea of local people actually saying to national government, we want you to change the rules because we don't agree with them. So yes, people want onshore wind. That was the clear finding from the Devon Climate Citizens Assembly. 89%, after listening to experts and after receiving information, said we want more of this technology. It's what's needed in an emergency. And we also need to change national policy. And you can see the condition 7 at the bottom right there. The way they want that onshore wind to happen is with lots of community engagement and, if possible, community ownership. So that's not seen as being a nice optional extra, but it's seen as being a very important part of making it happen and making it happen fast. So just to finish, I think it's widely recognized now that solar and wind energy aren't just technologies, they're things that involve people and communities, and that needs careful thinking through. And I've offered the concepts of place and participation as positive principles to understand what we mean by that social change against a very challenging backdrop in our countries of uncertainties and anxieties through those trends of COVID, etc. Both of these brief case studies illustrate how participation can unlock technological and social change in real world places. But it takes careful preparation, resourcing, and delivery, and it shows the value when you can have collaborative work between academic experts and practitioners and policymakers joining things up. So what I've tried to argue is that it's an opportunity to progress energy transitions in a just way as part of a process of sustainable placemaking. So not just thinking about technology, but thinking about the places where we hope to place those. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of where we're going, so one of the projects I'm just about to start is about really industrialized areas, so not lovely landscapes and lovely English communities living in the countryside, protecting what they think as being threatened areas, but actually looking at some of the most industrial parts of the UK that are also trying to decarbonize using technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. What happens when you try and do place and participation in those places too? Okay, thanks very much. That's probably more than enough for me, so I'll leave it there. And thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Patrick. A very, even an inspiring presentation, I would say, as you kind of combined the practical aspects with your research, the results of your research. Before we go to questions, answers, and also maybe a little bit conversation amongst us, I would request that we now come to our fourth presenter, which is a recorded speech. It's Manu Srivastava, who will speak about experiences with community engagement and some challenges in India. And if I may ask WebCon whether you can now show that presentation. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be speaking in the session on local acceptance of wind and solar. I would like to stress that it's extremely important that we bring down the prices of renewable energy, because countries and organizations who have to take practical decisions regarding shifting from conventional energy to renewable energy would do so largely for economic reasons and not merely for environmental reasons, even though I and most countries appreciate the challenge to humankind that is being faced on account of the environmental crisis. In spite of that, most countries and organizations, especially in the developing and underdeveloped countries, are having day-to-day struggle with survival, and their decisions are likely to be driven by economic considerations. So we have to work overtime to bring down the prices of renewable energy. And the second is that we should not just wait that as prices of renewable energy come down, automatically more and more customers would shift to it. Renewable energy is comparatively a new phenomena, the new contracts, new ways of using it. So we have to make it proactively easier for new customers, new organizations to start using renewable energy. It would not be appropriate to merely wait for organizations to take interest because the renewable energy has become cheaper, so they should themselves walk in and start using renewable energy. As practitioners of renewable energy, it is our duty to reach out to those organizations and to tell them how it makes sense for them to start renewable energy, how it is economically a viable option for them, how it's actually cheaper for them, how it creates savings for them, apart from the environmental benefit that we are so keen on. For example, a steel firm, a steel company is more focused on making steel, and the nature of energy that it is using is not its primary area of focus or interest. So it is our job to go up to the steel factory and guide them and help them to start using a form of energy which is both economically more viable and environmentally benign. I would like to share an example. Most ground-mounted projects in India, they focus on supply to discoms or to utilities. And it has really gone a long way in establishing renewable energy in the country. But we need to proactively go out to other institutions as well. So the first project executed by Madhya Pradesh in solar energy, Riva Solar Energy Project, it, apart from Madhya Pradesh discoms, it supplies energy to Delhi Metro. And it is being supplied to Delhi Metro not merely for lighting and cooling, but for actual running of the trains. So during daytime, 60% of the demand of Delhi Metro is met from this project in Riva, which is around 800 kilometers away from Delhi. The same thing we have tried in the next project of Madhya Pradesh, which is being set up in Agar, Shajapur and Neemach, where we are supplying, apart from MP Discoms, to Indian Railways, which would be using this power in 8 states across the country. We have tried to implement a similar philosophy in rooftop solar projects, where we have gone out to new categories of customers, to government colleges, police stations, medical colleges, National Law University in Bhopal, IIM Indore, substations of power grid. So all such categories of customers, each genre, each category of buildings were put in one particular tender. So there was a separate tender for government colleges, a separate one for government universities, because typically projects in universities are much bigger than those in colleges. A separate one for police stations, they're much smaller. A separate one for power grid substations. And we got rates which are the lowermost in the country. But more importantly, we have succeeded in reaching out to new categories of customers. Now, IIM Indore is getting power at the lowermost rate for rooftops in the country. So the advantage is that not only IIM Indore is using renewable energy, but every student of IIM Indore, and they would head important positions in various corporate or government sector later, they all would become messengers of solar energy, because they have with their own eyes seen that solar energy works, and it's very simple It's not a very complicated thing. You don't even realize as a consumer that you are using a greener form of energy than the conventional form of energy. After having talked of this, I would now shift to the initial point that I made, that of bringing down the cost of renewable energy. This is of prime importance, as I said earlier, if we want to make it easier for the governments, organizations in the developing world to start using renewable energy, we have to make it cheaper than conventional form of energy. Why it's so important, and why it helps to make renewable energy important. For this, it is important to realize that how does the funding for renewable energy come from? Now, we must realize that if renewable energy is of a scale, then it can't rely merely on the government. It has to increasingly rely on the private sector. The private sector gets most of its funds from banks. Typically, a project, 70% of the funding comes from banks. A bank would not touch a project with a barge pole unless it is satisfied that the project is bankable, it is viable, that the investment made in the project would give its returns over the next 15, 20 years. For this to happen, it is essential that the risks and uncertainties of the project are mitigated, and we have to consciously work on that. Apart from ensuring that such projects get funds from banks, and that also at low rates of interest, such projects also get investors who are okay with a more reasonable rate of return. This category of investors includes pension funds, sovereign funds. These funds don't require or don't expect skyrocketing returns. What they are more keen on are projects where returns are assured. So such investors have far moderate expectations of return on investment. Furthermore, large number of investors who would not typically walk into a project in a developing country, or let's say project in a state, would be interested if they realize that the risks and uncertainties are mitigated. So for example, in our Riva solar project, we had 20 bidders, which included 6 multinational companies. In our rooftop project, we had large number of bidders, and multinational companies also participated in our bid. How to lessen the risks, the uncertainties, is a chapter by itself. But broadly speaking, I would say that the few things that we need to do is, one is land. Land belongs to the sovereign, to the government, and it's far easier for the government organizations to provide land than for private organizations to go and procure land. So this is one responsibility that we should fulfill. And there is that when you set up the project, perhaps we should be having the procurer beforehand. We have large number of projects in India where the bidding is done, and then we go out looking for procurers. I would say that the nature of procurer is inherent or intrinsic to the bidding process, and the procurers should be tied up when we do the bidding. Riva got a low rate because Delhi Metro was on board, and Delhi Metro was considered to be creditworthy. That helped to bring down the rate for Riva. The same was true for rooftop projects. When the bidding took place, bidders knew where they had to set up their project. In earlier rooftop projects in the country, the pattern was that you would have one bid for a state. The developer would not even know where he is expected to put up a project. In our project, they exactly knew that this is not just one project for the state. There is a separate tender for government colleges, separate for government universities, and a separate one for power grid substations, for example. So they knew that what is the average size of the project, what is the profile of the consumer, is there any risk when it comes to repaying the developer for the next 25 years? They would know all that. Furthermore, we just didn't stop at identifying the category of the buildings. We located the building. So when I talk of a tender of government colleges, there were 207 government colleges in the state. So the list of 207 government colleges was there, and the folder for the tender for government colleges had 207 subfolders. Each subfolder had details about that particular college. It had the Google location. It even had a pre-engineering design for each college. So the developer sitting in his office in Noida or Bangalore or Pune could, at the click of a button, see that, okay, this project requires that many panels, that many inverters, and even the length of copper wire in meter was given. So they exactly knew the capital cost expected from them for each project. This helped to bring down the cost, because you can imagine that for a bidder, it would have been impossible to travel across all 207 colleges spread all over the state, because colleges are not just in the state capital or the division headquarters or the district headquarters, they're also in tehsil headquarters. So it would have been impossible, but we made it easier for them. So we finished the information asymmetry. That is the bane of tenders, and which sort of pushes the bidders to bid a higher number because they don't know what they are walking into. In our project, they exactly knew what they're walking into. They could actually see the building at the click of a button. Apart from that, there are numerous contractual provisions that are extremely important. The primary one is a payment security. The developer has to be confident that they would get their bills paid and on time. For the Riva Solar project, we had a provision for a government guarantee that in case the DISCOMs don't pay in time, the government of Madhya Pradesh said that they would step in and pay on behalf of the DISCOMs. When it came to rooftop solar projects, the various government departments, they gave a undertaking that they would be paying if the building owner does not pay on time. So these things have to be done to strengthen the payment security and fundamentally the confidence that the developer or the bidder has in the project. Then there are numerous issues regarding termination compensation, change of law. Change of law is something extremely important. If there is a change of law, then it's extremely difficult for the developer to handle that risk. So we have been very clear in all our contracts that if there's any change of law, the responsibility rests entirely with the procurer. So if there is an increase in taxation, if there is any other regulatory change, then the developer has been made immune or isolated from those changes. And that change is borne by the procurer. And this has been extremely important. I would just give one example that in case of Riva, Delhi Metro was initially keen that the delivery point should be Delhi. But we insisted that the delivery point should be Riva, where the project finishes. And so the risk of the delivery from Riva to Delhi is with Delhi Metro. What happened that when the project moved ahead and government finally issued the notification, they said that renewable energy transmission would be free, but only for utilities. Delhi Metro, not being a utility, not being a DISCOM, did not get this advantage. Now, if the developer had this risk, the project would just have failed. But because Delhi Metro had this responsibility, it was far simpler for Delhi Metro to reach out to the government and make a case that they should get the advantage of free transmission of renewable energy. And because of that, the project has survived and the project is doing well. So it's extremely important that the risk should rest with the party which is in the best position to handle the risk. Any change of law is a risk that is far better handled by the procurer than the developer. So it should be left with the procurer and the developer. So there are a number of such things, and I would just summarize it by saying that we can learn about these things more and more by listening to the bidders. The pre-bid meetings are very important. We should listen to what the bidders say because their suggestions help to lessen the risks for those developers. They know best that what is the problem they face in implementing a project. So as government, we should reach out to them, try to sort out their problems and try to have projects where risks are mitigated. That is how we would be able to get projects where the cost of renewable energy is low. And that is what would help us to carry renewable energy to the market, to the consumers, that would be my message. And I would again thank the organizers for having invited me so that I could share my views with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was a very important perspective, introducing some important aspects when it comes in general to policy frameworks. But I found very interesting that how much Manu Srivastava emphasized the importance of the financial, the economic aspects of renewable energy. That is the determining factor. That's, I think, how he told it, how he called it more or less. Let me kind of summarize. I think we can have a little bit of discussion now here. What I understand is that we have first one level, that is the, let me call it cognitive level, the information level. It is certainly very important, and I heard this from three of you, also now from Manu Srivastava. It's important to provide the right information. And we can come back a bit later to that, because I also like to hear about your how you, nobody has touched that. There are these anti-wind groups who spread information against. So assuming that that kind of information is given, that is correct, and people are aware of what are the facts, I still see three now different factors, which is the economy, so financial incentives. That is what Manu Srivastava just emphasized so much. I think he would have been surprised that none of you three really emphasized so much the environmental benefits, because he said that that is not so important for a country like India. So this is the second kind of area of benefits, and what we also know from our research, that why people indeed are supporting the energy transformation. And the third is something that the three of you all referred to different degree, the cultural benefits and the cultural part of this transformation. So I'd like to ask you how you would see these three factors related: the economic benefits for a community, the environmental benefits, and the cultural benefits. And I want to start with our first speaker, with Jan Philipp, because I anyway wanted to come back to you and ask you, when we come to the cultural benefits, you mainly referred to Germany, but how is the experience of WPD in other parts of the world? So if you'd like to address these topics. And maybe you're still muted. Yes, I think you're muted.
Here we go.
Yes.
I think they are all quite important aspects for real. But if we are dealing with a project in Brandenburg, the locals are mainly interested in the economic benefit. They don't so much care about the environment. To generalize, I'm not talking about everybody, but the first questions I'm getting if I'm proposing a project, it's what's in for me, economically speaking. So there is the aspect of participation as well, but the setting in Germany, at least in the eastern part of Germany, is more. We have regional planning schemes. So the decision where a wind farm is set up or can be set up is not made on the local level. It's on a level above, to say. And many people just take it. Some try to oppose it, but it's more or less not in their hands to have an influence on that. I think it would be important, but the question I would have towards Mr. Divine Right is, there's a trade-off from my point of view between participation on one side and the speed we need in order to implement new renewable energy plans. And I would like to know if you have found a solution for that trade-off, because that's what we are dealing with every day, and we need to be quick.
Yeah, that indeed leads us to Patrick. And Patrick, if I then may ask, because now you introduced kind of another factor, benefits participation. I think, Patrick, you referred to it as democracy, that maybe that's the fourth dimension, or maybe it's part of the cultural dimension. But Patrick, please feel free to directly respond to this, and maybe you can also kind of put these 3 or 4 factors into relation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, I think these are really good questions and really, really hard questions too. I think, as just been said, it isn't easy to reconcile those 2 conflicting objectives of trying to get things done quickly and often trying to get things done fairly. And I think, you know, I wrote a paper actually on this called A Delivery Democracy Dilemma a couple of years ago. I might share it with some of you. I think the point I would make is that I think that there's a lot that can be done before a wind farm developer turns up and says, I'd like to build this here. And this is where I think maybe we need to point to other kinds of actors like municipalities, civil society groups, you know, a variety of others, to lay the foundations for the discussions that need to happen. And if we simply, as has been the case too often, I think in the UK, if we let the developer be the sole actor that's involved in making people aware of the fact that there's energy policy targets in the first place, we're really not doing things in a very suitable way, because the companies are not there to educate society, they're there to get on with projects, and yet that's what's happened a lot of the time. So I think that's part of the difficulty. And if those discussions happen a bit earlier, because councils are a bit more proactive in making local energy transitions happen, then I think you have a different kind of context, and perhaps you can get things done quicker. But I think you also have to be aware of the delays that often happens when projects don't go well. And you know, for example, I've been advising an Irish grid company for the last 10 years, and they have a project that they tried to build over 10 years ago, and it's still not built. So the cost of delay is enormous, and it isn't. So I think we've got to be very careful, and it's a kind of a similar debate about climate change. How much will it cost to invest in green energy technologies? Well, how much will it cost if we don't is a really important point too, and I think it comes in here too. But these are difficult issues, and I think there is a cultural dimension to this, as well as a political dimension and a financial dimension, in the sense that I remember a project I looked at in Northern Ireland some years ago, and there was really no possibilities of participation in it at all. And people didn't really mind, because they had no culture of being asked what their views were in the first place, which again, I'm not sure is a good idea, but they didn't notice the absence of possibilities to participate because they never really had any opportunities in the local area anyway, because that wasn't how politics got done. So that tells you something about the cultural context. And of course, maybe it's something to come back to the speakers about, because if you're working in 28 different countries, then that cultural context surely is going to come out, and there will be different norms and different expectations of what companies should be getting up to and what they should be saying and doing across those contexts. And that's kind of interesting too. So you're right, academics come up with these principles like participation, but they really do vary from place to place, and it'd be interesting to hear more about that.
That sometimes even, I mean, less participation can extend. I mean, you indirectly kind of mentioned that if there's less participation, then there is more people are spoiling process. Maybe even at the end, you may have longer processes than, at least in the democratic countries and democratic parts of the world. Unhappy people will rather spoil you, and then you will have political resistance. Let's ask now, Fabrizio, how I mean, you very strongly emphasized with your video that you showed us the cultural dimension, but how you see these 3. And I know that this video that you showed us has a very, again, practical background, because it's made at your wind farm. do you see how you rate these different aspects, and how would you say the importance of participation versus giving money to the people is, and please also environmental aspects. But I think nobody said that that's the first driver. That's been clear so far.
No, I would like to recall. I would start from a different point of view. We are companies, and the companies are seen, and it's quite obvious, as making money. People who is doing business to make money. So as soon as you start developing a wind farm, a PV project, wherever you are, they are looking there. They are saying, okay, you are getting money from here. How can I get the same money from you, or from the same thing? So this is the starting point of view of the people when they are claiming money. And what we try to do as Falke is to come together and let's do it together. And in some cases, the point that you were just mentioning about different cultures, because we're working in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Netherlands, in Finland, in UK, and even UK between Britain and Scotland, England and Scotland, it's quite different, the perception and the point of view, so, and the culture. For example, in Netherlands, you are obliged to keep on board 50% of the project for the local community and local cooperatives. And this is by law, but this is, let's say, something that came on board also because there is an environment in Netherlands, for example, where people is ready to put together their means and start building projects. So we should be, we state ourselves, we need to be intended as enablers of such projects, because probably people alone cannot do them. But if we are there, we can do it together because we have the knowledge, because we know how to do it, we know which are the steps, but the people locally has the power of doing this. So it's a matter that if we merge the efforts, and we put together the efforts, this might change the point of view of the people. Because again, if you're coming there as a developer and the people say, okay, somebody is developing a wind farm here, and then from 2 years' time, they hears that the wind farm has been sold by the developer to an utility or a fund for thousands and thousands of euro per megawatt, and they said, okay, they just traded papers. What is coming to us? Only somebody who is aiming to put turbines here without caring ourselves. They do not care about self. They just care about us, ourselves, only when we go out of the street and making some noise. So the people is starting doing this approach when they see that they are not involved. So involving people at a very early stage is important. Of course, you have to make some preliminary studies. This cannot be done with people, but as soon as you start a sort of visibility of the project, we normally go locally, and it depends on the country. For example, in France, in some cases, you are prevented even to talk with landowners if you didn't before talk with the major, the town council. So there are different ways of engaging local people, but the only common factor over there is that if they see somebody coming from outside, making money with something that they see as their heritage, their landscape, their resource, wind or solar, whatever it is, or wood in other cases, they start thinking that they need to have a stake of this profit. They're starting from a different point of view. So again, we should come there, we talk with them, we need to understand which are the way that we can do it together. And then from there, we can build up a relationship that might be prevented. It's not always the let's say, not the final resource, is not the magic solution, but it's something that in our experience is helping them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense what you say. It seems money plays an important role that cannot be kind of neglected, that must play a role, but somehow it's a combination. So you really need experience, and I see that those who have done this many occasions, obviously you're learning. I want to touch now what I've already mentioned before. I wanted to hear from you how you see these negative impacts which are also coming, and some of them orchestrated. I mean, I'm always saying that we need lobbyists in every village for wind energy, and the best way of doing it is making people see that it's good for them. They have these benefits. What we see is now often when someone, whoever that is, comes to a village, wants to build a wind farm, the anti-wind information is in the meantime faster than the information, the fact-based information. When I heard these stories first, more than 15 years ago, our current president, Peter Rae from Australia, it was at fastest spread in the English-speaking world, Patrick, because I think came from North America. And now we see that these kind of platforms, they're very well connected, and they spread these real fake news about wind turbine syndrome, things like that. Of course, this is all, but it's a bit like the COVID situation now. It's not fact-based, but how to encounter this, and how, I mean, my answer to this has always been, we need, as I said, we need to have these lobbyists, so there needs to be local support. How do you see in, if I may first ask Fabrizio, do you see in your projects that is a problem, and how do you deal with this situation?
You just made the right example with COVID. There is always somebody who is trying to say some fake news and some not correct information on the plant. This is always there. But the real problem I see on the permitting side, on the lengthy process of permitting, is not the anti-wind or people who is against them. Because if you work properly, but even in cases where the projects are very highly contested locally, at the end they may go ahead. The only way that they might go ahead if there is a political willingness to bring them forward. And the political willingness, the real missing chain is between the political willingness and the actual administrative action. Because political, in Glasgow, they say everything, but then if you go normally in the offices asking for a permit, then you say that, okay, we don't care. We have ambitions, but we are not called to save the world through our office. So the real missing connection is between the political willingness and the real action by the administrations. Local people is our duty to be properly engaged, but it's not the real key issue. And the fake news, again, is not the real point. It has been always like this. There's been a lot of local newspapers that were saying something which was not real. I heard in the past that cows were stopping making milk because they were close by turbines, or people who was not able to sleep anymore if they were staying 10 kilometers far away from a turbine. Stupid things, but this can be quite easily debated, demonstrated. The real point is that lengthy process is not against, but is only the real political willingness.
I see that, Patrick, you say that you have other commitments now. So if I may then ask you for your now final statement and how to deal with these, how you rate such anti-wind propaganda. I see it in some cases serious threat to development, but how you rate that and what's the best way of dealing with it? And then please your final word.
I mean, I think it's, again, it's another really tricky issue because people have freedom of speech and you don't want to curtail that. But at the same time, we recognise that, you know, as you said, some stupid things get said and they really aren't patently true. I think, I mean, my advice would be not to try and control what people say. You cannot do that. And it's more important to, as we've just heard, to get in there early and to present the side that you're on and make it clear where you're coming from, and to do that as transparently as possible. You know, there will be people who say things that, you know, are patently untrue, and I don't think you can control that. And I think social media amplifies the voices that people have on that. But again, I think that's just the culture that we're in now, the societies that we're in. And I think all you can do is to be consistent and clear and transparent about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that's really, that doesn't really solve the problem, but, you know, I don't think there is any quick or easy solution in that kind of social media context. Ultimately, it's coming down to trust, and whether they trust local people more than outsiders or an external company. So if people believe that you're there in an honest way and you've got their long-term interests, if you can build up relationships and trust, then I think you have more of a chance of being listened to than if you're not seen in that way. Thanks, and I'm afraid I have to go, but thanks for the event.
Well, thank you very much for participating here. And I think we let you go now. And yeah, as you know, this is part of a process. So thanks a lot for your insights and your statements. Then I would request, as for the final statement now, again, Jan-Philipp, you heard now what your colleagues said. How do you deal with this situation, which I think you mentioned that you are mainly responsible for Brandenburg. I remember when in the election campaign, there was a big show with Anna Baerbock, the chancellor, candidate for chancellor, and there was one of these anti-wind people on television, and no one was there kind of encountering what this person was saying. Do you have this experience in your projects, and how you deal with it?
We have it pretty much everywhere. Yeah, I mean, it's not about the people who are against a project. You have them pretty much everywhere, but and those other people talking to the mayors, talking at presentations, and of course it's our way of dealing with that is is that we won't convince those people of the positive side of wind energy. What we have to deal with are those people that are undecided, that are still looking for answers. And like Mr. Devine Wright said, I think it's a matter of trust in the end, and we can only provide information, which we try, on the aspects that are brought up, and that's how we try to deal with it. And it takes, and the problem is that it takes a lot of time, of course we are always biased as an investor, as somebody who in the end has to earn money with a project. I would wish that we would have some support from other organizations who are not as biased as, of course, we are as a company, but that's very rare, actually, that those people who are actually for a wind energy project speak up at public conventions. Or I've never heard of somebody going to their mayor and asking for a new wind project if they are not actually involved, having land somewhere or something like that. That's very rare, sadly.
Yeah. So I'm thinking now about the way to go, and I think for sure we have always a certain percentage of people who cannot reach, and this COVID situation now, it's just telling us all, because people are dying, the facts are so clear, and there's still some people who just say that it's not true. So we have, I don't know, 10-15% of the society, we have delivered that. What I understand from your experience is that, yes, with the right strategy, we can convince the majority of the people, and we can have good projects which are beneficial for us as a company. Of course, that we need always to say, because that is necessary, but also for the communities, for the people where the wind farm will be or the solar farm will be built. The reason why we're having this meeting here, as I told you, part of this project is we're thinking about developing something like recommendations which can be used internationally, that can help the sector, that it's not company X or Y which says this is how we do it, but saying that this is a recommendation, we follow this, so you can be sure that you're treated in a fair way. I'm again, and this is my really last and short question, Jan-Philipp, you heard about there's this Faire Windenergie, it's a fair wind project certificate in part of Germany, which has certain kind of standards. Do you see this as something useful, that project developers, which are in this case developers, which are following certain rules and standards, they can put a fair certificate on their shoulder or wherever?
It might be useful at some point, but I think the standards that have to be met are so general, mostly, that I would say that we fulfill them anyways. So we didn't really have to change something in order to get the badge. And I think what really will change something is actually this paragraph 6 of the Federal Energy Law. I really have high hopes that if more and more mayors become aware of that. I mean, it's again a financial thing, but it's easy to implement, it's quick to implement, and it's what mayors want. They want money in their hands and to set up their own projects, and that's
just to explain for our audience, that means that in the German law there will be a new regulation. If you just explain that briefly.
Okay. There's a new regulation before starting from this year. As a project developer, we are allowed, which wasn't the case before, we are allowed to give money to communities. It's up to 30,000 euro per wind turbine per year. They can use the money for whatever they want, or more or less. And that's pretty much it. And from my experience, this really changed the point of view to wind energy for a lot of mayors.
Very good. So we come to the end. I see also Fabrizio has to leave now, but I think we anyway come to the end. And Fabrizio, I would give you the last words. You know, we are discussing this in order to find out, and we will have meetings in the not so distant future, how to further develop, whether we should develop some international recommendations, which could include something like that, which is now the case for Germany. But Fabrizio, final words for you.
No, the final words is that the local communities can be considered as a resource and can be a counterparty. And so we need to work in this way. The empathetic approach is the winning one. Of course, anti-wind and people who is prejudicially against the wind resource, but also as the others, will be always there. It's a matter that we need to open our minds, hear what they have to say, and try to debate their position and put them in a very weak position, because they cannot state anything without any to justify their statement. So again, local communities are key, and we need to be able to manage them properly.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very good conclusion and summary of this session. As I mentioned before, we will, as World Wind Energy Association, we will continue to work on this topic. Already 15 years ago, we developed these guidelines, due diligence and sustainability guidelines, which have a chapter on community engagement. Many of the companies didn't see it that important at that time, but we want to open the discussion again. And yeah, we will have next World Wind Energy Conference in Italy, maybe come up with some public statements by that time. With this, I close this session here, not without saying thanking you, thanking everyone, thanking our speakers here, also our audience, which we cannot see now, but they will see us. And of course, not without saying that tomorrow we will continue with the third day, the final day of this World Wind Energy Conference, starting with the first session, which is a panel of CEOs of wind and solar companies. And then we will have again several parallel sessions on wind power policies, on small wind. There are 2 sessions on small wind. Wind farm approval processes, which is related to the topic we're talking about here, about international market practices, about large-scale hybrid systems, digitalization, and then finally about grid design. So with this, I wish everyone a nice, whatever the time is where you are, rest of the day, evening, a good night, and yeah, have a good time. And I look forward to seeing many of you tomorrow again. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Ciao, ciao. Herzlichen Dank.